Your Majesty.
Stand up straight, girl. I've seen you. You are the one who comes to all the plays at Whitehall, at Richmond.
Your Majesty.
What do you love so much?
Your Majesty.
Speak up, girl. I know who I am. Do you love stories of kings and queens? Of feats of arms? Or is it courtly love?
I love theatre. To have stories acted for me by a company of fellows is indeed...
They're not acted for you, they are acted for me. And?
And I love poetry above all.
Above Lord Wessex? My lord, when you cannot find your wife, you better look for her at the playhouse. Playwrights teach us nothing about love. They make it pretty, they make it comical, or they make it lust. They cannot make it true.
Oh, but they can. I mean, Your Majesty, they do not. They have not, but I believe there is one who can.
My Lady Viola is young in the world, Your Majesty is wise in it. Nature and truth are the very enemies of play acting. I'll wager my fortune.
I thought you were here because you had none. Well, no one will take your wager, it seems.
£50.
£50? A very worthy sum on a very worthy question. Can a play show us the very truth and nature of love? I bear witness to the wager and will be the judge of it as occasion arises. I've seen nothing to settle it yet. Are there no more fireworks? They will be soothing after the excitements of Lady Viola's audience.
In a world overflowing with movies, we need a hero. Someone to separate the bad from the good.
Sounds like a job. Verbal dioramas. Watches all the movies from comedy to drama. From the top row sound. And don't forget the action. She'll watch until the end and then she'll give you her reaction. Movies you know, movies you don't. Prequels, sequels, remakes, and trivia and outtakes. Movies you know, movies you don't. Interesting stories, all the categories.
Hi everyone, I'm Em and welcome to Verbal Diorama episode 252, Shakespeare in Love. This is the podcast that's all about the history and legacy of movies you know and movies you don't. And as always, welcome to Verbal Diorama. Whether you are a regular returning listener, whether you are a brand new listener to this podcast, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for choosing to listen to this podcast, as opposed to all of the other podcasts that undoubtedly are in your podcast apps waiting for you to listen to right now. I am so happy to have you here for the history and legacy of Shakespeare in Love. And speaking of love, thank you for all the love and support everyone who listens to this podcast and continues to listen to this podcast and has continued to support this podcast for the last 5 years now, and now over 250 episodes. It means so much to get those messages of support from people and just generally lovely comments and support for the most recent episodes. So I've recently done episodes on Back to the Future, which was episode 250, which was obviously a bit of a milestone moment for this podcast. And then the most recent episode was on Van Helsing, which, let's be honest, it's not really as big a movie as Back to the Future. However, like all the movies that I feature on this podcast, there's always an interesting story behind it. And Stephen Sommers can do no wrong in my eyes because he's the man who gave us The Mummy, and The Mummy remains the greatest movie ever made. So we're moving on from Back to the Future and Van Helsing into Shakespeare in Love, which is a wonderful little movie. I absolutely adore this movie. I'm not going to hold back. I'm just going to tell you, I absolutely love Shakespeare in Love. I think it's wonderful. But Shakespeare in Love asks many pertinent questions about the life and times of Shakespeare. Not that it is wholly historically accurate, by the way. But how is it that a movie can be wholly and completely tarnished by one man? I don't know. It's a mystery. But let's talk about it. And don't worry, I'll definitely talk prose. Here's the trailer for Shakespeare in Love.
When will you write me a sonnet, Will?
Meet young Will Shakespeare.
I have a sonnet to write.
Sonnet? You mean a play?
He's out of luck,
I say this theatre is closed. Notice will be posted.
out of money,
I'm still owed money for this play.
What is money to you and me?
and out of ideas.
I hear you have a new play for the curtain.
What's it called?
Romeo and Ethel, the pirate's daughter.
Until she came into his world.
Who is she?
Dream on, Will.
I heard you were a poet.
I was a poet till now.
Shakespeare!
My heart belongs to you, but I will marry Wessex a week from Saturday.
Is she fertile?
She will breed. If she do not, send her back.
If they find you here, they will kill you.
For one kiss, I would defy 1,000 Wessexes. That woman is a woman!
How refreshing.
Winner of 7 Academy Awards.
I'll have poetry in my life, and adventure, and love, above all.
Starring Academy Award winner Gwyneth Paltrow,
It is a new world.
Joseph Fiennes,
Scene one. Mwah! God, I'm good.
and Academy Award winners Jeffrey Rush,
Love and a bit with a dog. That's what they want.
Colin Firth,
Tide waits for no man, but I swear it would wait for you.
Ben Affleck,
What is the play and what is my part?
and Judi Dench.
She's been plucked since I saw her last, and not by you.
The show must.
Go on.
Shakespeare in Love.
Romeo and Juliet.
Juliet? You mean it?
Just a suggestion.
William Shakespeare is a known but struggling poet, playwright, and actor who has not only sold his next play to both Philip Henslowe and Richard Burbage, but now faces a far more difficult problem. He is bereft of ideas and has yet to begin writing. He is in search of his muse, the woman who will inspire him, but all his attempts fail until he meets the beautiful Viola de Lesseps. She loves the theatre and would like nothing more than to take to the stage, but is forbidden from doing so as only men can be actors. She is also a great admirer of Shakespeare's works. Dressing as a man and going by the name Thomas Kent, she auditions and wins a part in his next play. Shakespeare soon sees through her disguise and they begin a love affair, one they know cannot end happily for them, as he is already married and she has been promised to the stern Lord Wessex. As the company rehearses his new play, William and Viola's love is transferred to the written page, leading to the masterpiece that is Romeo and Juliet. Let's run through the cast. We have Joseph Fiennes as William Shakespeare, Gwyneth Paltrow as Viola de Lesseps, Jeffrey Rush as Philip Henslowe, Colin Firth as Lord Wessex, Ben Affleck as Ned Alleyne, Judi Dench as Queen Elizabeth I, Simon Callow as Edmund Tilney, Jim Carter as Ralph Bashford, Martin Clunes as Richard Burbage, Imelda Staunton as Nurse, Tim Wilkinson as Hugh Fennyman, Mark Williams as Wabash, and Rupert Everett as Christopher Marlowe. Shakespeare in Love was written by Mark Norman and Tom Stoppard and was directed by John Madden. Love knows nothing of rank or riverbank. It will spark between a queen and the poor vagabond who plays the king, and their love should be minded by each, for love denied blights the soul we owe to God. Also said some guy called William Shakespeare in a true story based on his exact life, called Shakespeare in Love, that contains zero fabrications, zero untruths, might as well be called a biopic. It's so factual. I know all this too, because I live in a small town in the county of Warwickshire. Warwickshire is designated as Shakespeare's county because William Shakespeare's birthplace of Stratford-upon-Avon, or Stratford as the locals call it, is in Warwickshire. This makes me especially qualified to talk about my neighbour, Will. I jest, of course. In Warwickshire, we are not taught Shakespeare anymore, or any less than any other educational system teaches Shakespeare, but he is very special to our county. And I've always admitted on this podcast I am not a huge rom-com fan, but I am a huge period drama fan. And I adore this movie because it gives me the period drama rom-com that I want and I need. Shakespeare in Love has a long, turbulent story to the screen and beyond though, so let's begin with haste. Not with two households, both alike in dignity, but one household, the Norman household, in the mid-80s, and young Zachary Norman studying a 4-year theatre course at Boston University, calling his dad, telling him his idea for a movie about Shakespeare just starting out as a playwright. His dad was screenwriter Mark Norman. Norman would meet TV show creator Edward Zwick at the 30-something production offices, and they got to talking about stories. And Norman pitched Zwick this idea about a young William Shakespeare and the making of Romeo and Juliet. The idea was to portray the Elizabethan theatre as the Hollywood of the era, and young Will as just another struggling writer-director who had to deal with devious producers, placate temperamental actors, and overcome writer's block, in addition to satisfying the public's appetite for safe, palatable fare in a period where it was considered blasphemous for women to be on the stage. With Zwick's help, Norman sold the concept to Universal Pictures, who commissioned Norman to write the script. The script was completed in 1991, and wanting more wit and whimsy, the president of Universal, Tom Pollock, wanted to get Tom Stoppard, the writer of plays like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead and Arcadia, to contribute to the project's development. Stoppard, though, wasn't interested in being the second writer on anything, so Edward Zwick got on a plane, arrived in London in the spring of 1992 to persuade him. The two men would go to tea because, of course, this is England, and Stoppard regaled Zwick with his stories of life as a Czech immigrant and how studying Shakespeare had been integral to his love of English language and literature. Zwick left the UK not knowing whether Stoppard was interested in working on the screenplay or not, but had enjoyed the experience of meeting Stoppard that Zwick didn't really care either way. And then Tom Stoppard said yes, but only if they paid him $1 million. Universal didn't want to pay him $1 million. But then Julia Roberts entered the picture. The Julia Roberts wanted to star in a period rom-com, and she'd heard on the grapevine about this project, and she was interested. Universal, hearing that the biggest movie star in the world wanted to star in their project, was enough. They acquiesced to Tom Stoppard's $1 million price tag, and 10 weeks later he'd written his first draft. Edward Zwick read it and knew it was the movie he'd waited his whole life to direct. 6 weeks later, an exact replica of the Globe was being built at Pinewood Studios, and Zwick planned a return to London, this time with Julia Roberts, who'd been working with dialect coach Joan Washington, with a view to choose her male castmate, the man who'd be playing William Shakespeare. However, when they went to pick her up on the way to LAX, Julia Roberts was AWOL, staying at an undisclosed location to avoid paparazzi. Days before she was due to marry Kiefer Sutherland in June 1991, the engagement had been cancelled. The address to which they were directed to pick her up from was the home of Jason Patric, Kiefer's friend and co-star in the film The Lost Boys, whom Roberts was currently dating instead. Roberts and Zwick sat next to each other on the flight from LA to London, and Roberts was refreshingly candid about her life, relationships, and how much she loved making movies, specifically how much she loved the script for Shakespeare in Love and how it captured the madness of falling in love, something she had prior experience in with a couple of her former co-stars. Speaking of co-stars, she piped up she had decided who she wanted to play William Shakespeare, that it had to be, quote, Daniel, of course, unquote. She meant Academy Award winner Daniel Day-Lewis. Zwick had already met with Daniel Day-Lewis, who was committed to making In the Name of the Father for his good friend director Jim Sheridan. Roberts was steadfast, though. Daniel Day-Lewis was her man, and she'd persuade him. On arrival in London, casting started in earnest, despite Roberts' insistence it wasn't needed, that Daniel Day-Lewis was the only man for the role. She asked Zwick to cancel the actors waiting at the hotel to audition, and that Daniel Day-Lewis had agreed to be in the movie. To save face, Zwick told the actors that Roberts was unwell that day and they'd reconvene another day, because as far as he was concerned, Daniel Day-Lewis was committed to another movie, and how had Julia Roberts managed to sway him? Then he got a call from Daniel Day-Lewis and they met at the pub. No, he wasn't going to be in Shakespeare in Love because he was doing In the Name of the Father, and Julia Roberts wasn't going to get her way. Zwick returned to the hotel, informed the casting director to notify Roberts' assistant that casting was going to begin at 10 a.m. the next morning. To say Julia Roberts wasn't impressed is an understatement, and that unimpressed demeanour continued as she read with Ralph Fiennes, Hugh Grant, Rupert Graves, Colin Firth, Sean Bean, Jeremy Northam and Russell Crowe, and Roberts found fault with all of them. At a full screen test at Pinewood, Roberts, in full period dress, tested against Paul McGann without an American accent, and a general sense of discomfort and unease permeating the room. Julia Roberts would check out of her hotel the next morning and fly back to the US, with her manager confirming to Zwick she would not be continuing with the project. $6 million later, Julia Roberts was off doing other projects, and the sets were being torn down. Shakespeare in Love was finished. A couple of years later, in 1994, Edward Zwick directs Legends of the Fall, a financial success, a 3-time Academy Award nominee, a winner for Best Cinematography, and a 4-time Golden Globe nominee, including a Golden Globe nomination for Zwick himself as Best Director, when he gets a phone call from actual Shakespearean villain Harvey Weinstein, who had seen Legends of the Fall, loved it, and wanted to finance Zwick's next movie. Zwick mentioned a little movie he never got made, Shakespeare in Love, and sent Weinstein the script, written by Tom Stoppard. Weinstein loved it and contacted Tom Pollock at Universal to acquire the rights. Upon hearing the $6 million in sunk costs, though, Weinstein's enthusiasm faltered. He didn't want to pay for the rights plus $6 million, and Zwick didn't hear back from Weinstein after that. Zwick tried in vain to get another financier. He sent scripts to other actors like Mel Gibson, Johnny Depp, Kenneth Branagh, Winona Ryder, Stephen Dillane, Emily Watson and Jude Law. 1994 turned to 1995 to 1996, and Zwick was concentrating on other projects when out of the blue he noticed an announcement in the trades that Harvey Weinstein and Miramax had acquired the rights to Shakespeare in Love and intended to make it the following year. But no one had thought to tell Edward Zwick. Or maybe Harvey Weinstein just elected not to tell Edward Zwick. The story, as it was told to Zwick, involved the script he sent to Winona Ryder. She was good friends with Gwyneth Paltrow, who saw the script while staying at Ryder's house. Paltrow, having done several movies for Miramax and Weinstein at that point, told Harvey Weinstein about the script and said that she wanted to star in the movie. In a move very reminiscent to episode 250 on Back to the Future, Weinstein was made aware that Universal wanted the rights he owned to King Kong. The trade was King Kong for Shakespeare in Love. There may have been other items in that deal, but nothing else that I could find. So Miramax now owned the rights to Shakespeare in Love, and according to Weinstein, Edward Zwick was being removed from the project, that his time was up, that he'd been paid by Universal, and he had no obligation to include Zwick in anything going forward. So Zwick threatened legal proceedings, and Harvey Weinstein responded exactly as you think he would, with threats, aggression and intimidation. Until Zwick started recording the phone calls and Weinstein realised he was serious about the lawsuit. Weinstein backed down, agreed to meet, and apologised profusely. Crocodile tears, you could say, begging for forgiveness, and what could Weinstein do to make it up to Zwick? Zwick would end up with a producer credit on Shakespeare in Love, but even then, Harvey Weinstein would do everything in his power to try to dethrone Zwick, remove his credit, and belittle his involvement, but we'll come back to that a bit later. Miramax chose John Madden to direct after acquiring his previous movie, Mrs. Brown. Madden loved Stoppard's script but wanted to make it more of a Shakespearean comedy with an underlying layer of seriousness. Despite Weinstein acquiring the rights on Gwyneth Paltrow's desire to star, she wasn't immediately up for the role of Viola. Kate Winslet was sent the script by John Madden, and they met with her excited at the prospect, but she wanted to concentrate on smaller movies after making Titanic. Winona Ryder was considered again, and Diane Lane and Robin Wright were also considered. Gwyneth Paltrow, though, was on the up and up after starring in movies like Emma and Sliding Doors, and just like Julia Roberts, was a paparazzi pleaser with her relationship with Brad Pitt dominating the tabloids. And then she and Pitt broke up. Paltrow was heartbroken and turned down the role of Viola, and then reconsidered after speaking to Miramax producer Paul Webster. Russell Crowe and Ethan Hawke were considered for Shakespeare himself, and while his older brother had read for the part initially, it would be Joseph Fiennes who nabbed the part of William Shakespeare, although reportedly it was a role Harvey Weinstein wanted for regular collaborator Ben Affleck. Affleck, like the role he eventually played, would have to make do with the smaller role of Ned Alleyne, but at least he didn't die, unlike Mercutio. With John Madden, his previous star of Mrs. Brown, Judi Dench, came on board to play another queen, Not Victoria this time, but Elizabeth I. Whereas the last attempt at filming Shakespeare in Love was going to be filmed at Pinewood Studios, this time it would be shot at Shepperton Studios. On location filming locations included Broughton Castle, doubling as the de Lesseps Mansion, Eton College's chapel and Hatfield House for the fireworks scene. The beach at Holcombe in Norfolk also served as the Shipwreck Beach. Production designer Martin Childs had the task of recreating Elizabethan London, an era where most architecture that remains is surrounded by Georgian and Victorian buildings. Like everything in this movie, imagination flowed freely. Childs and John Madden spent weeks playing around with models, built perfectly to scale, before they came up with a picture of London that seemed worthy of setting in stone. The filmmaker's vision of London in 1593 came to life on a plot of land behind Shepperton Studios, which up until that point had been a garden nursery. A construction crew of 115 men in only 8 weeks constructed 17 buildings, including the Rose and Curtain theatres, meandering alleyways, a brothel, a tavern, a whole marketplace, and of course, William Shakespeare's home. Research on what the original Rose Theatre looked like was scarce, so Childs once again delved into his imagination, leaving it mostly undecorated but with a little bit of grandeur on the stage. Considerable records of the Curtain Theatre still exist, so Childs was able to follow this research, constructing a heavily decorated, elaborate theatre where Queen Elizabeth I was a regular patron. John Madden knew that to really bring the Renaissance spirit of Shakespeare's times to life, the costumes and makeup would be vital. He chose 2 Academy Award nominees to take on the task, costume designer Sandy Powell and hair and makeup designer Lisa Westcott. Powell's aim was not to create historically accurate costumes, but to use a bit of artistic license, that there was always room for imagination whilst always keeping it convincing. The most elaborate costumes Powell created were, of course, for Queen Elizabeth. Though her dresses and headwear appear almost surreal in their ostentatiousness, Queen Elizabeth apparently had over 1,000 dresses. They were all hugely flamboyant and over the top, because as Queen she carried all of her wealth on her gowns. They were literally piled high with jewels. The Queen's makeup is similarly over the top. Lisa Westcott would reference the fact that Queen Elizabeth would have been in her 60s in 1593, and so she probably would have had terrible skin, probably from mercury poisoning, covered in thick makeup. Her hair probably would have been falling out, and so this is why she would always have worn a wig. It's rumoured that Queen Elizabeth I had over 80 wigs, all different colours, and that her hairline would have receded from the front, giving her that high forehead look. Westcott and her team spent 4 hours daily with Judi Dench to prepare her makeup and finery, and this look had to be replicated for all of the other ladies in the Queen's court, because the Queen set the fashion of the time, and so everyone else in court copied her style, and this is why many of the women in the film are seen wearing wigs of a similar shape and style. Sandy Powell had previous experience dressing a woman as a man in the movies Orlando, The Crying Game and Velvet Goldmine, and began designing the costumes for Viola as Thomas Kent, using the doublet and hose with a cropped wig and a moustache, with the idea to make Gwyneth Paltrow look as boyish as possible. This was then juxtaposed with Lady Viola's fairly simple but elegant dresses. The de Lesseps family are wealthy, but Viola is quite down to earth, and this is reflected in most of her gowns and limited jewellery. And I've spoken a little bit about artistic licence, and this is a movie that is bubbling in artistic licence because, shocker, this is not a completely factual story. There are some basis of fact in there. The idea that Shakespeare and Anne Hathaway's marriage might not have been happy is alluded to in the movie. He was 18 and she was 26 and 3 months pregnant when they got married in 1582. A shotgun wedding, you might say. And this hypothesis aligns reasonably well with existing knowledge, mostly in part because nothing is known about the actual Shakespeare's life from 1585 to 1592. He may have been perfectly happy, but he also may not. But him being in a happy marriage doesn't really translate to him spending long periods of time in London, hundreds of miles from home from his wife and children. It's also true that well-bred people attended plays but did not appear in them, and women did not appear at all. Female characters were always played by young boys. The supporting cast in the movie, which includes self-absorbed actors Richard Burbage and Ned Alleyne, eccentric theatre manager Philip Henslow, and bubbies and death-loving teenage playwright John Webster are all real and fairly faithful to what historians know about them. Alleyne and Henslow, for example, both kept diaries, with Henslow's tending to corroborate the portrayal of him in the film as an eccentric. Alleyne married Henslow's stepdaughter in real life, so the two men were related. We know Alleyne was the lead actor in The Admiral's Men, the troupe of actors during the Renaissance period, and performed in several of Christopher Marlowe's plays, including Dr. Faustus, Tamburlaine and Barabbas in The Jew of Malta, as well as in Shakespeare's plays. We know that Henslow had his fingers in several business pies, including property, money lending and pawnbroking. It is factual that he purchased the Little Rose in 1584, and on the land he built the Rose in 1587, and he did this with a grocer named John Chumley. The Rose was the first purpose-built playhouse to ever stage a production of any of Shakespeare's plays. We also know that a severe outbreak of bubonic plague meant the London theatres were closed almost continuously from June 1592 to May 1594. And we know that street urchin John Webster would go on to make a name for himself as a writer of grisly plays, such as The Duchess of Malfi and The White Devil. We also know that it was impossible for Lord Wessex to be travelling to the New World, namely a new colony in Virginia in 1593, because the Jamestown settlement, the first permanent English settlement in the Americas, wasn't established until 1607. The lost colony of Roanoke was established by Walter Raleigh in 1585, but all the colonists disappeared in mysterious circumstances, so it was highly unlikely that Lord Wessex would have been travelling there. The real Earl of Wessex title actually died with the death of Harold Godwinson, aka King Harold II, who died in the Battle of Hastings in 1066. It was resurrected in 1999 for Queen Elizabeth II's youngest son, Prince Edward, on his marriage to Sophie Rhys-Jones, becoming the first British prince to be specifically created an earl instead of a duke. His wife became Sophie, the Countess of Wessex. When his father, Prince Philip, died, and then his mother, the late Queen, he became Duke of Edinburgh, passing the Earl of Wessex title down to his son James. But I think it's safe to say, Stratford-upon-Avon mug aside, that this is a work of fiction set in a factual time period, with flashes of truth, including references to many of Shakespeare's works, as well as other Elizabethan literature. It's also remarkably similar to the plot of No Bed for Bacon, or Shakespeare Sows an Oat, originally published in 1941 by Carol Brahms and S.J. Simon, a book Neil Gaiman considers a comfort read. When Shakespeare in Love came out, No Bed for Bacon was prominently featured in the press as being the inspiration for the script, which isn't true, despite it including a love story between Shakespeare and Lady Viola. Principal photography began on Shakespeare in Love on the 2nd of March 1998 and ended on the 10th of June 1998. And while Harvey Weinstein wasn't hovering over the shoot, he did take umbrage with the ending after the reception at test screenings were muted. He felt like they'd made a rom-com that had a depressing ending. He wanted Shakespeare to end up with the girl, but Shakespeare couldn't end up with the girl. Shakespeare had a wife, and so the end was rewritten and reshoots occurred with Viola and Will bidding each other a fond, passionate farewell, with Viola insisting she was committed to marrying Lord Wessex and inspiring Will's next play, Twelfth Night. Joseph Fiennes had shaved his beard off after filming ended and had to stick a fake one on for the reshoots. And speaking of characters with beautiful, beautiful beards, segue into the obligatory Keanu reference for this episode. And if you don't know what that is, it's where I link the movie that I'm featuring with Keanu Reeves. For no reason other than Keanu is the best of men, and Keanu does love a Shakespeare adaptation. Because if you've not seen Kenneth Branagh's Much Ado About Nothing, it is one of the best modern Shakespeare adaptations. And like this movie, it is full of beautiful, beautiful people. Not only does it have Kenneth Branagh starring and directing, pretty much at the peak of his Shakespearean powers, it also has Emma Thompson, Denzel Washington, a very young Kate Beckinsale, which is a lovely little link to the previous episode, and of course, Keanu Reeves as Don John. It is genuinely one of the best Shakespeare adaptations that's out there, I would wholeheartedly recommend Much Ado About Nothing, and it's a great way to link it to this movie because Much Ado About Nothing was written by Shakespeare. Stephen Warbeck, as we're going to come to, won an Oscar for his Shakespeare in Love score. He also scored Billy Elliot and Captain Corelli's Mandolin, and also Mystery Men, which seems so different to all of his other works. But I do have quite an affinity to Mystery Men, so I'll take it. But really, when we're talking about Shakespeare in Love, now we're going to be getting into the marketing and general reception of this movie. This is where the nitty-gritty starts to come into play, because once reshoots happened, the movie tested off the charts with general audiences. And when it premiered in New York, it also won over the industry crowd as well. While it was released in 1999 here in the UK, it was released in 1998 in the US in a limited release of just 8 cinemas on the 11th of December 1998. It wouldn't open wide until the 8th of January 1999, and even then that was just 632 cinemas across the US. But its reputation grew, and by its 11th week of release, it peaked at number 4 at the domestic box office in the US and 2,030 screens nationwide. It would sit in the top 10 at the US box office for a total of 16 weeks. The first 3 weeks of its release it spent outside of that top 10 due to it only being a limited release. It's safe to say, though, it was an unprecedented box office hit. On a budget of $25 million, it would gross $100.3 million domestically and $189 million internationally, for a total worldwide gross of $289.3 million. Critics also loved it too. It is a critical darling. It sits at 92% on Rotten Tomatoes, with the consensus saying endlessly witty, visually rapturous, and sweetly romantic. Shakespeare in Love is a delightful romantic comedy that succeeds on nearly every level. Rotten Tomatoes speaking the truth there. So now we need to speak about its awards. On the 21st of March 1999, at the end of a fairly lengthy Academy Awards ceremony, Harrison Ford took to the stage of the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in LA, and his job was to hand out the final award of the evening, the coveted Best Picture Award. The previous Best Director statuette had been awarded to Steven Spielberg just minutes before Harrison Ford appeared on stage. Obviously, Steven Spielberg and Harrison Ford are close friends, and few in the auditorium were in any doubt which name he would be reading out for Best Picture. The favourite going into the ceremony was Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan. But Harvey Weinstein had other ideas. And this is a man who is now a convicted rapist, a known bully, and from this story alone, not averse to threats, coercion, or whatever he needed to do to get his own way. And he wanted to win over the Academy, because Academy winners bring prestige as well as big box office returns. And Harvey Weinstein's plan was fairly simple. It started by persuading the stars of Shakespeare in Love to a blitzkrieg of press appearances, radio call-ins, TV shows, interviews, talk shows, press junkets, cheap publicity for months prior to the Oscars. Weinstein would suggest that the greatest thing for them would be for this movie to win Oscars, for them to win Oscars. And with this movie, they would win Oscars if they worked hard enough on the press trail. The New York Times ran 5 to 6 pages of advertising. There were trade ads in Variety and The Hollywood Reporter. Weinstein put on a swanky party for John Madden, inviting Academy members, something that was against Academy wining and dining rules. 100,000 glossy brochures were accidentally printed and deployed across every Starbucks in Western LA. Weinstein deployed people to lobby Academy members with phone calls and started negative whisper campaigns against other movies, namely Saving Private Ryan. Saving Private Ryan is only really the first 15 to 20 minutes, Weinstein's lackeys would say, but Shakespeare in Love is love, poetry, heart, creativity, and it was all about the power and passion behind the performing arts industry, the Academy's industry. Shakespeare in Love also benefited from screeners on VHS tapes that allowed Academy members to watch contenders in the comfort of their own homes. Weinstein personally called members to ask if they'd received their tape, to show people how they should be cold calling Academy members, because of course he had a team of cold callers. Miramax was also the first to host private screenings for Academy members in Aspen and other popular holiday destinations over holiday breaks. By contrast, Steven Spielberg, who not only directed Saving Private Ryan but co-owned DreamWorks, the studio that produced it, didn't feel the need to go out and schmooze Academy voters. He found that his movie spoke for itself. It was an important movie to him personally. Miramax's negative campaigning against Saving Private Ryan was a huge no-no in the Oscars race. Spielberg refused to stoop to Weinstein's level, but DreamWorks stepped up their campaign, running more ads in the trade press. So back to that evening of the 21st of March 1999, Harrison Ford takes to the stage. They think he's going to say Saving Private Ryan, but he doesn't, because Weinstein's tactics paid off for the most part. Shakespeare in Love started the 71st Academy Awards with 13 nominations and ended the 71st Academy Awards with 7 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Actress for Gwyneth Paltrow, Best Supporting Actress for Judi Dench, Best Screenplay, Best Art Direction, Best Costume Design, and Best Original Music or Comedy Score. Saving Private Ryan won 5, including Best Director for Spielberg. Paltrow's Best Actress win was also unexpected. The frontrunner was Cate Blanchett for Elizabeth, the same Elizabeth played by Judi Dench, with a remarkable 8 minutes worth of screen time, though nowhere close to Beatrice Straight's 5 minutes and 2 seconds of screen time Oscar win in 1977 for the movie Network. The 1999 Academy Awards ceremony was the biggest Oscars upset in history, and the biggest Best Picture upset in history. Back to Ed Zwick, who, as producer, had the rights to make an acceptance speech. It was agreed before the ceremony that should they win Best Picture, that Donna Gigliotti would speak first, then David Parfit, and then Edward Zwick. But instead of Gigliotti passing the microphone to Zwick, she passed it to Harvey Weinstein. The music began before Mark Norman or Ed Zwick could speak, and the show ended. Weinstein had given Zwick the final nail in the coffin on Shakespeare in Love. The fact Weinstein even had the audacity to take the stage to accept the Best Picture award was an unorthodox move for a studio chief, and it highlighted his absolute belief that he was number one. Weinstein also gave himself a producer credit, which would also create industry-wide change. As a result, the Harvey Rule states that a producer must have contributed significantly to the final product in order to receive a Producers Guild credit. Weinstein had also given himself a first dollar gross position in the profit stream, denying thousands of dollars to every other participant. Harvey Weinstein truly is the villain to end all villains. Shakespeare in Love would also win 4 BAFTAs from 14 nominations: Best Film, Best Actor in a Supporting Role for Geoffrey Rush, Best Actress in a Supporting Role for Judi Dench, and Best Editing. But it's not the end of a turbulent Oscars for Shakespeare in Love, because American author Faye Kellerman sued the makers of Shakespeare in Love, claiming they stole the story from her 1989 novel The Quality of Mercy. Quality of Mercy tells the story of a young Jewish woman, Rebecca Lopez, who crosses swords with William Shakespeare while dressed as a man. The two fall in love, attempt to solve the murder of a friend, and help Jews flee the Spanish Inquisition by smuggling them into London. Kellerman started her legal action just under a week before the Oscars and sought profits from the film and unspecified damages. Her lawyer suggested the film should have been up for a Best Adapted Screenplay Oscar rather than the Best Original Screenplay Oscar it would go on to win. Despite a Miramax spokesperson saying the lawsuit was absurd and suggesting a publicity stunt, they would settle out of court for an undisclosed amount. Shakespeare in Love has also been adapted, bizarrely, back into a play. The play Shakespeare in Love, adapted by Lee Hall, premiered in the West End in July 2014, closing in April 2015. It also played in Canada in 2016, the US from 2017 to 2019, in South Africa in 2017, Japan in 2018, and South Korea in 2023. A separate Japanese version, titled Shakespeare of True Love, unrelated to Hall's adaptation, ran from December 2016 to January 2017. And how is this to end? As stories must when love's denied, with tears and a journey. I don't have a poker face, I'll show my hand. I adore this movie. It's not for everyone, but it appeals to my love of period drama, my love of Shakespeare, my love of witty scripts, and, well, my love of love. For I am truly the biggest cynic when it comes to love, especially true love, love at first sight, and yet this movie makes me believe. It makes me think it exists and that love is genuinely found in all places. The characters in Shakespeare in Love really were inventing show business. Everything we think of when we think of the entertainment business. Celebrity, arguments over billing, public relations, rivalries, lawsuits. But most tellingly, it's the behaviour of Harvey Weinstein that stands out. His power-hungry antics have somewhat tainted this movie now, and it's such a shame. Maybe this movie isn't as genre-defining as Saving Private Ryan or Elizabeth, and maybe some people are looking at their Oscar statuettes and wondering whether they won it fair and square, or whether Weinstein's strong-arm tactics are responsible. Shakespeare in Love's multiple wins essentially made it a requirement to compete for awards, and it became increasingly common to have entire teams of publicists and consultants dedicated to the season. Campaigning for awards season is now commonplace, even though there are outliers who still win without it. After Shakespeare in Love's win, DreamWorks launched a full-scale American Beauty campaign the following year and succeeded. They repeated the process with Gladiator in 2001. There were traces of Weinstein's practices everywhere. During award ceremonies, unfavourable reports about films would surface, frequently raising suspicions they were planted. Prior to the 2002 Oscars, a number of charges, including those of anti-Semitism, were made against John Nash, the mathematician whose life story was adapted in the Best Picture contender A Beautiful Mind. However, the movie still went ahead and won the top award. Other forms of campaigning remained controversial. For Gangs of New York's Best Picture nomination, an opinion piece supporting the film, supposedly written by the Sound of Music director and former Academy President Robert Wise, appeared in the press. However, it turned out someone from Miramax's publicity department had ghostwritten it. The advertising that includes quotes or comments by Academy members was subsequently outlawed by the Academy. In 2023, Andrea Riseborough unexpectedly received an Oscar nomination for her performance in To Leslie. This caused some controversy as other actors like Jennifer Aniston, Gwyneth Paltrow and Kate Winslet praised her performance on social media at the last minute. Concerns were also raised by Michelle Yeoh's sharing of a screenshot of a Vogue article which implied she was a better winner than Cate Blanchett, breaking the rules prohibiting mentions of rivals. The Academy also strengthened its rules once more. Oscar campaigning continues to be a lucrative business. According to The Hollywood Reporter, consultants can earn $25,000 a month in retainer fees, plus bonuses of $25,000 for securing a nomination and $50,000 for a win. It doesn't always pay off financially, though. Just ask Netflix for its Oscar pushes for both Roma and Maestro, neither of which ultimately took home the big award. But the ultimate question remains, was Saving Private Ryan really robbed of its Best Picture Oscar? Or were more Academy voters just charmed by a period romantic comedy than a serious war epic? A huge marketing campaign can put the idea in people's heads, but it can't force an Oscar win for a movie that nobody liked. We'll never know if Shakespeare in Love would have been chosen on its own merits, but it should have been. And if anything, it serves to highlight, if proof is indeed necessary, it is not, what an absolute dung beetle Harvey Weinstein is, was and continues to be. This is small fry stuff compared to the countless sexual harassments, abuse and assaults, but it's pretty obvious with hindsight that Weinstein was capable of doing awful things to other human beings to get what he wanted. Actually, that's insulting to dung beetles. They are actually worthwhile creatures. And yet, after all of it, Shakespeare in Love is charming and likeable. It's funny and sweet, and it has all the backstage politics you'd expect from warring theatres in 16th century England. Looking like a 90s rock god in a leather jacket and flowy shirt splayed open to his breastbone, Joseph Fiennes is brimming with passion for poetry, romance and his love for Viola, along with his messy hair and soulful gaze, and these are what makes him a ridiculously sexy Shakespeare. It's a portrayal of masculinity rarely offered by mainstream cinema, that you can be the greatest playwright of your time, and also tender and charming, and be also somewhat cheating on your wife. We don't condone cheating, but he kind of makes you want to condone cheating. Paltrow is luminous as Viola, her accent is impeccable, and it's hard to believe that it was this movie and not Emma or Sliding Doors that served to highlight her best. Everyone in this cast is perfect. Dame Judi Dench owns every scene she is in. The script is witty, charming, and deliciously full of Shakespearean references. The production design, costuming, hair, and makeup is sublime. Its history and legacy is complicated, but the proof is in the pudding. This is a terrific movie that also serves to highlight love above all. That you can have it, you can lose it, but love will endure. I will have poetry in my life, and adventure, and love. Love above all. Not the artful postures of love, but love that overthrows life. Unbiddable, ungovernable, like a riot in the heart, and nothing to be done can ruin or rapture. Love as there has never been in a play. I will have love, or I will end my days as a film history podcaster. And tell Master Shakespeare something more cheerful next time for Twelfth Night. Thank you for listening. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Shakespeare in Love. And as always, thank you for your continued support of this podcast. If you wish to get involved and help this podcast grow, you could do something really quick and simple, like leave a rating or review wherever you found this podcast. You can find me at Verbal Diorama on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Letterboxd, where you can like posts, repost posts, do whatever you want with those posts. It all helps. Or just simply tell your friends and family about this podcast. And if you like this episode on Shakespeare in Love, then you might also like the episode that I did on William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. It was a movie that came out 2 years prior, directed by Baz Luhrmann. It is the definitive Romeo and Juliet for the millennial generation, and it is episode 219 of this podcast. It was an incredibly fun episode to put together, as also this has been. This has been an incredibly fun episode to do. But I would highly recommend Romeo and Juliet, especially because it's so heavily referenced in this movie. Obviously, give me feedback. Let me know what you think of my recommendations. So the next episode, perfect production design, perfect puppet work, perfect casting. But let's talk about the script. It's not easy to adapt a cartoon into live action, especially one of the most well-known primetime cartoon series of all time. Imagine making The Simpsons into live action now. It just couldn't be done. But in 1994, a live action version of The Flintstones came out. And it was marvellous. Honestly, it's a bloody joy. I love it. But the story of 2 producers, 2 directors, 14 screenwriters, 18 TV gag writers, and a tense fight with the Writers Guild of America over final credit is a story for the next episode. So, yabba dabba doo, join me next week for the history and legacy of The Flintstones. And yes, I have been waiting to say yabba dabba doo, join me for a very long time. And I always say this podcast is free and it always will be free. But if you do have the means to support this podcast financially, that would be an incredible help. And you could join the amazing people who support Verbal Diorama through the Patreon. They are Simon E, Sade, Claudia, Simon B, Laurel, Derek, Kat, Andy, Mike, Luke, Michael, Scott, Brendan, Lisa, Sam, Jack, Dave, Stuart, Nicholas, So, Kev, Pete, Heather, Danny, Ali, Stu, Brett, Philip, Michelle, Zenos, Sean, Rhino, and we have another brand new patron, Russell. And I have to say welcome back to Russell, because Russell was a patron for a little bit last year and he has returned to the promised land. So welcome back, Russell. And if you want to join these amazing people, you can. You can go to verbaldiorama.com/Patreon and you can sign up to subscribe to the Patreon. Or if you just want to give a one-off donation, then you can do that too at verbaldiorama.com/tips. If you want to get in touch with me and you want to say hi or you want to give me some feedback, then you can email verbaldiorama@gmail.com, or you can go to my website, verbaldiorama.com, and you can find all episodes on there, a little bit of information about me, and you can also find a contact me form as well. And you can also find the bits that I do over at filmstories.co.uk. You can find copies of the magazine, and also articles online as well. And finally,
That woman is a woman!
What? A woman? You mean that goat?
I'll see you all in clink! In the name of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth!
Mr. Tilney! Have a care with my name, you will wear it out. The Queen of England does not attend exhibitions of public lewdness, so something is out of joint. Come here, Master Kent. Let me look at you. Yes, the illusion is remarkable. And your error, Mr. Tilney, is easily forgiven. But I know something of a woman in a man's profession. Yes, by God, I do know about that. That is enough from you, Master Kent. If only Lord Wessex were here.
He is, Mum.
Your Majesty.
There was a wager, I remember, as to whether a play could show the very truth and nature of love. I think you lost it today. You are an eager boy. Did you like the play?
I liked it when she stabbed herself, Your Majesty.
Master Shakespeare. Next time you come to Greenwich, come as yourself. And we will speak some more.
bye.
Movies you know.